Our first keynote speaker is Dr. Christine Grant, and Dr. Grant is a professor of chemical and biomolecular engineering at NC State. She has served for 12 years as the inaugural Associate Dean of Faculty Advancement, where she's responsible for faculty development, promotion, and tenure in the College of Engineering. She's conducted research in surface and interfacial science and developed a green chemical engineering curriculum. She has been recognized for broadening participation, promotion, and retention of underrepresented minorities and women in STEM. She is a recipient of many awards, too many to name, but I will list a few awards. 2015 American Association for the Advancement of Science Mentor Award, the 2003 NSF Presidential Award for Excellence in Science, Math, and Engineering Mentoring. That's the PASMAM Award. That's presidential, meaning the President of the United States. The 2019 William W. Grimes Award for Excellence in Chemical Engineering, and the 2019 Joseph N. Cannon Award for Excellence in Chemical Engineering from the National Organization for the Professional Advancement of Black Chemists and Chemical Engineers, NOBCHE. She has been a visiting senior scholar at the American Association for the Advancement of Science, a grant expert and a program director at NSF. And she's also been a writer. She has co-edited books, including Success Strategies from Women in STEM, A Portable Mentor. She has contributed chapters to Growing Diverse STEM Communities, Methodologies, Impact, and Evidence, and the recent ACS publication, Overcoming Barriers for Women of Color in STEM Fields. So thank you so much, Dr. Grant, for being here, and I will hand it over to you.
Thank you. Can you hear me, Robert?
Yes, I sure can.
Okay, great. So I'm going to share my screen. It's great to be here. It's great to see my NSF colleagues. I guess I should probably give the disclaimer now, right? So I like to speak about mentoring. And so therefore, I will say that the comments that I am bringing today do not necessarily represent the comments of the National Science Foundation, even though I am a program officer at the National Science Foundation now in broadening participation. And I'll talk a teeny bit about that at the end. So my goal here is to talk to you about mentoring and share my experiences in the mentoring realm. So I'm really excited, and I'm going to go ahead and get started. So my slides. Okay. So the title of my talk is Mentors Everywhere, Weaving Informal and Formal Mentoring into a Robust STEM Mentoring Quilt. And as he mentioned, I am a professor of chemical and biomolecular engineering at North Carolina State University. And I've been on the faculty there for over 31 years. I think I'm getting to 32 years at this point. So it's been quite a long journey. So my goal today is to share some of my experiences with you, to empower you to think about mentoring. If I was in the room with you, I would make you take a piece of paper out, or I would give you a sheet of paper that had some things on it. So I'm going to make you do a little bit of work. I'd like you to put some things in the chat. I may or may not be able to see them as I'm sharing my slides, but please share with each other as I'm asking you to. So I want to tell you a story. It's called A Mentoring Tale, A Van and a Vision. So I always forget how to start the story because it's just so exciting to me. I was at a conference, an ERN conference, and Emerging Research Networks conference last year before the pandemic in January. And I was talking to a friend, and my colleague here, Joel Dukas, who's a professor at North Carolina State University, who's actually acting Associate Dean of Faculty Advancement now that I'm at NSF, but he's a professor of civil engineering. Anyway, he was talking to these people. He's an alum of RPI. And he was talking to a group of people who had gone to RPI and were alums. And he said, oh, I got to get you over here to meet Christine Grant, because I know she knows Janet Rutledge. And some of you know Janet Rutledge, who is the dean of the graduate school at UMBC, from where some of your esteemed alum from the LS-PAC program have come from. And they know Janet, and so you know Janet, so let's meet. So we get together and we meet each other, and I'm looking at them and I'm saying, oh, you look familiar to me, you look familiar to me. And I said, is it possible that if you went to RPI, they said, did you go to RPI? I said, no, I didn't go to RPI. And that's Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, which is in Troy, New York. I'm from Schenectady, Albany, New York area. And I said, is it possible that you all did some tutoring of some high school students like back in 1976? And they were like, no, we didn't do that. And so I'm talking to these two people and I said, but you look familiar. And this woman, as you can see, has a very distinctive look that you remember her later. And I said, no, you do look familiar. And so she started talking to the guy. She said, no, we didn't do that. So then she said, wait a minute, don't you remember? We had this vision that we wanted to mentor minority students from the city of Albany, New York. And we got a van, remember? And the guy's like, yeah, I remember. So he says, yeah, we got this van and we used to drive from RPI, which is on the other side of the Hudson River, over to Albany. And I said, I was in the room. Every time I tell the story, I get choked up. I was in the room. I was that young girl in 1976 who was sitting there waiting for, see, I can't tell the story without crying, waiting for these students from RPI to come. So I was a freshman in high school. And these students who were at RPI came over. She said they had big afros then. I said, we look different. We had big afros then. They came over from RPI and they mentored me. And actually, it wasn't really about the math tutoring. It became more about how to get into college, how to become an engineer. And this is before, or right about the time that the National Society of Black Engineers was starting. And so they came over and they mentored me, and this is them. So this is like a really powerful story. I love telling this story because, we were like crying and it was like, oh, my man, it's like, yeah. So whatever happened to me, I became a professor and, all this other stuff you hear about. So I love telling this story because, and the other people in the picture play a role as well, because I'm doing some mentoring with them and they're doing some, it's kind of really interconnected. So I love telling the story because it just tells you, you never know how the impact of mentoring, how it will manifest itself. And so I love to start with that story. So what I'm going to talk to you today about is this thing I call the STEM mentoring quilt. And where did I come up with this? Well, a quilt is usually a patchwork of a lot of different things put together. And when I think about mentoring, I think about all the people in my life who have mentored me. And, there are different ways to make quilts, right? You cut the pieces out, they're all the same size and you put them together. And then there are other times when you just kind of take all these different pieces and you put them together and they make this quilt, right? So I came up with this idea of this STEM mentoring quilt. And the idea is that, mentoring, neat is great, but messy is normal when it comes to mentoring. So you cannot always plan your mentoring relationships in a perfectly ordered manner. You need to just thread the needle and get it done. So I want to ask you today to tell me, how has the pandemic impacted your mentoring relationships? Because I know that you would go in and we're going to talk about what a mentor is and how to do mentoring and ideals for mentoring and how to create your own mentoring plan. This is what I want you to do. You got a lot of great things. I looked at your schedule for the whole meeting. You've got a lot of great speakers that are coming to talk about real specifics. I want you to think about what kind of things you need for mentoring. So why don't you just put in the chat, if you don't mind sharing, how has the pandemic impacted your mentoring relationships? Now, your mentoring could be the mentoring of your advisor, your PhD advisor, your postdoc advisor. It could be somebody who's outside your laboratory. There's lots of different types of mentors. And if you don't mind, I'm going to read some of these if I can get to the chat. Let's see. Oh, nobody's put anything in there yet that I can read, but go ahead and start sharing about how the pandemic has impacted your mentoring relationships. What were your expectations? And now you're home. I'm in my dining room. I'm not going to show you my dining room. It's a mess, but there's all kinds of computer screens all over. So how has it impacted your mentoring relationships? And then we're going to come back to that. So I said in my abstract that I was going to consider the shifting roles of mentoring during and after the pandemic. I'm actually not going to really address those in detail. I'm going to ask you to figure that out for yourself. So as I start to talk about the different types of mentoring, maybe you can think about how you can apply these mentoring concepts to the new mentoring that you might need after the pandemic. So this is what I'd like you to do. Take a piece of paper. I'm going to show you this later. So I want you to think about your personalized mentoring ally plan. That's what I'm calling it. And we'll talk about what mentoring is and what allies are in a few minutes. I want you to take a piece of paper, just draw, square on it, and put who, when, where, notes, and how. I'm going to show you this again because I want you to write some stuff down, because when I'm done, I want you to think about or have on a piece of paper, what are you going to do differently for your mentoring plan in the future? So this is what I found online when I looked up mentoring, and this is actually geared more towards the people who are doing the mentoring. However, if you are a recipient of mentoring, these are things that you could ask your advisor or mentor to do with you, or things that you might want to think about. It advised that there should be more check-in conversations more frequently to help your proteges or mentees, proteges, I use those terms interchangeably, to prioritize their goals. A different kind of to-do list. So maybe you cannot meet on a weekly basis. Perhaps you should be, and you can't be in the lab as much. These were written primarily at the beginning of the pandemic. Conducting a literature review, working on outlines and background for a manuscript, reading articles saved for when we have time to read them, preparing research summaries, focusing on smaller, more manageable tasks. So if you're remember now, your advisors are also dealing with elements of the pandemic. So if they have young children at home or elderly parents that they're having to now take care of, they're also being impacted. So you have to be mindful of that. Suggest virtual coffee hours. They don't have to be long, they don't have to be drawn out, but just so you can have touch points with people. Ask them what support they need to address challenges during the pandemic. So again, these are written primarily for the mentors, but you can kind of take these things and maybe ask your mentors some of these things. Help them to problem solve, be creative, listen, don't fix, acknowledge the full range of their emotions. Let them know that what they are feeling is natural and acceptable. Be flexible with the expectations. You may need to change expectations, lower expectations about what you wanted to do over a period of time. And then it says, stop trying to fix your mentee. Your goal is not necessarily to be the fix-it person for them, but to be a sounding board for them. And again, we'll talk more in detail later about how those relationships might happen. But I think the last bullet is one of the most important: to assist with networking. Networking opportunities have changed, they've dried up with the cancellation of face-to-face conferences. One of the things my colleagues, I don't know if you mentioned this, but I'm actually the president-elect of the American Institute of Chemical Engineers. And in that role, we're having a conference face-to-face this fall. We didn't have one last fall. And so it's going to be interesting because now people are going to have to, I think it's going to be a hybrid, but people have to kind of get back in the groove of these two ways of interacting. So today I'm going to talk about building on a mentoring foundation, talk a little bit about the scholarship of mentoring, mentoring flow system that I've come up with, and then constructing your mentoring ally diagram, and then continuous impact in the mentoring realm. We may not get to everything because I tend to get into story mode, and so I see one of my people on here, Zakia, I see you down there. I see you. This talk actually was the kind of the genesis of this talk was this chapter I wrote in this book called Mentors Everywhere, Weaving Informal and Formal Mentoring into a Robust Chemical Sciences Mentoring Quilt. I didn't want to leave anybody out, so I made it STEM for this topic here. But this was based on a talk that I gave at the American Chemical Society, and I had an opportunity to write a chapter, and these women were actually in the chapter, a combination of chemical engineers and chemists. And so one of the things I'd like to talk about is this concept of peer mentoring, and also this concept of mentoring and getting mentors outside of your discipline, right? So they don't have to be specific to your discipline. But I see in the Zakia, see there's this Zakia's name up there. So let me give you a little bit of background about myself. Here we go. So I joined NC State as an assistant professor in 1989. And then all kinds of stuff happened, which we're not going to talk about today. And then I got tenure. It was not an easy process. For those of you who are in the process, you know that there are elements of it that are really challenging. And then I found my voice in leadership, research and extension. I became an associate dean. And then I became a full professor. Then I became an associate dean. And then I was working on creating community and then doing things beyond that. So when I first joined NC State as an assistant professor, I was the first and the only African-American woman professor in chemical engineering at NC State. And we had 200 plus, almost 300 faculty when I started. So I was the only African-American woman in the whole college for 16 years. So it was pretty daunting. So if I wanted to see African-American women, and for me, that was important for me to get together with that community, I had to fellowship with women who were around the university. So we're in English and sociology, and we got together and interacted. I had a lot of mentors and coaching during that time period, external advocates. I remember calling Dr. Warner. He probably remembers some of these calls, screaming, you know what they did to me? Oh my goodness. And I remember somebody saying something about suing and all that. Well, we won't go there, Dr. Warner. That's a long time ago. However, there were some things and there were some external advocates that I needed to rely on to actually help me get through some of those situations. Then I became a national leader doing some things in that realm, and then internal leadership. And then there's more, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that. But my foundation, my mentoring foundation, was my family. So my uncle actually was a chemist. And this is my mom and her siblings. My mom actually became a biology teacher. And no, don't get upset. That was in the 50s, and she doesn't have safety glasses on. Okay, she's dissecting a cat with no safety glasses on. But so she went to a college, State Teachers College in New York, which is now SUNY. She was one of a few people in her class. That's when they had quotas, like 2 out of like a whole bunch of women in her class. She became, she got a degree in biology, and then she couldn't find a job up there, so she had to come back south and teach in the segregated South. She passed away a few years ago, but her legacy kind of lives in me, obviously. And then there's my dad. My dad is still living. He is or was a music teacher. He went to a college. He went to Ithaca College up in Ithaca, New York. And when he went to campus, he couldn't live on campus because they didn't allow African Americans to live on campus. So his mother had to find, he was from New York City. His mother had to actually find him a place to stay in town with an African American family in order for him to go to college. Over time, it changed and he was able to stay on campus. But these are the things that obstacles that they came up with. So this foundation of mentoring and helping people and helping students, because they were teachers, is part of the core of who I am. And this is my father as a music teacher, and then my mother with some of her students. Now, there are lots of formal and informal mentoring that happened in my world. Pre-college, I had high school chemistry teachers. I also had some men, mostly men at this point, who were chemists, who we went to the same church, and I was a little girl growing up. And so I would see them and we would talk about things and our families would interact. That's Ron Brooks and Frank Starkey. Then I was in a program, a pre-college program to increase minority engineering graduates. And then I was active in the National Society of Black Engineers. And there's a picture of me. Oh, you know, I forgot to tell you my hair story. But anyway, if you looked at those pictures of me before, well, I'll go back to that because that's actually really important. So the thing about this picture, this series of pictures, is it talks about the confidence I had in who I was and presenting myself to others, right? So the first picture actually here is when I was a graduate student and my hair was pressed. And then the second picture is me in front of, as a new professor, and I had, looked very scholarly. I had my collar on, and I was sitting in front of a bookshelf to look very scholarly. And then the third picture is me after I got married. And so I wanted everybody to know I was married. So I had my hand up there so you can see what race it is. Still married. Okay. And then I had some pictures where, I had a wig, and then I started actually to go natural. And I will tell you that I actually had my hair in braids in parts of these times, but I would never take a formal picture for the university publications with braids because it was too ethnic. I wasn't comfortable with it. I'm not making any judgment calls. I'm just saying I wasn't comfortable. So you'll see that over time, I started to take formal pictures with braids and then natural hair, and then I'm just natural now, right? So what is the importance of this series of pictures, even just besides being fun? They actually tell how I actually grew into kind of being more confident about presenting myself as an African-American woman and the cultural aspects of who I am. I was the only African-American woman in college. I was different. That was enough. They weren't worried about my hair. I was the one worried about my hair and how I presented and wanted to be conservative. So that's just full disclosure. I'm not saying it was right. I'm not saying it was, whatever. That's just my story, okay? So anyway, there were a lot of different mentors that I had in the graduate space, the National Organization of Black Chemists and Chemical Engineers, and the GEM Fellowship Program. These were all people, a lot of these are chemists. This actually was from the article. So a lot of these, it focused on chemists, people who were on my advisory committee. And again, mostly men. There were women and but anyway. And then in the professional realm, there are some other people, as you can see, who were involved in my life. And again, these are mostly chemists because this was for that article on chemistry. So anyway, the bottom line is that I had formal mentors and informal mentors, people who I worked for, and then people who mentored me through these organizations. Of course, my first mentor was my mom. I love this picture because it's me on my boat. Well, actually, it was my dad's boat. And I used to take microbes out of the water and look at them under my little microscope. Do you like the pigtails? Aren't they cool? And this is me doing my first engineering project. See, I don't know if I was taking it apart or putting it back together. But the point is that, you know, I had they featured me in this edition of Chemical Engineering Education a few years ago. And it was a really fun time to actually tell my whole story, all of the things that influenced me and all of the things that came together. And you should start to do that, start writing those things down. Now, several years later, actually last year, I had an opportunity to participate in this book chapter. And I wrote a book chapter called Rediscovering Our Original Selves. What do we leave behind and pick up on the journey to success? And this was the result of being at NC State for 30 years. And I took 30 days off. Yes, 30 days off. And I was approached by Pamela Leggett Robinson to write a book. So of course, what does an academic do when they're taking 30 days break after 30 years? They write a book chapter. But of course, what else would you do? You can't just rest. So anyway, I wrote this book chapter. But the reason I'm telling you about this is because I journaled early on in my career, and I found those old journals, and I found that there was a lot of stuff that happened to me that was so uncool early on in my career. And I wrote it down, and I didn't realize that I had forgotten a lot of it. And I didn't realize that there were words that I now had to describe what happened to me early on in my career, like unconscious bias, microaggressions, stereotype threat, inclusivity issues. I did not realize that all that. So anyway, this book chapter is me kind of reflecting back on finding these journal chapters, these journals from 20, 25 years ago, and looking at them through fresh eyes now that I'm 30 years into this thing, and I have words to describe what happened to me. So I would encourage you all, if you journal, if you write, you know, you're thinking, oh, it's not going to amount to anything. You never know. Some things might come up later that you can utilize. So let's go back to mentoring. So the scholarship of mentoring. Mentoring is both a process and a product. In essence, the success of the process and the product is often measured by looking at the nature of the mentoring relationship. Some people say, I never had a mentor. Well, okay, maybe. Now, there are lots of different terms that people use for mentoring. It could be coach, guide, role model, peer advisor, and a sponsor. Some people don't like the term mentor and mentee because it's a hierarchical relationship, and it implies that somebody has power over someone and that the mentee is just this little. So sometimes I use the word protege, but don't get stuck on the term. We know what we're talking about when we're talking about mentoring. So it's interesting because this is another book that I had an opportunity to co-edit, and I wrote a chapter in there on mentoring. The important point is to find somebody who's compatible. They don't have to be the same race, religion. They don't have to have the same sexual identity. That, you know, you can have a mentor in anyone. However, for me, it was important to have mentors that look like me, and I had mentors that didn't look like me. The important thing, like I said, is to find someone who's compatible and is going to work with you. So here are some of my mentors. And again, this was a slide I used in a talk where I was talking about chemists and chemical engineering. And so I said, and some of my best friends and mentors are chemists. Some of those people you'll recognize. You'll see Dr. Warner's up there, Dr. McGuire is in there. And there's just a lot of people over the years who just sewed into my life. I'll give you a couple examples. This gentleman here, Harold Freeman, is a textile chemist. He was at NC State. He retired a few years ago. He was a deacon at my church, right? So we would meet once a semester early on in my career, separate from my building. We would have lunch, and he would look at my resume, and he would say, no, too much of that, more of that. Oh, that looks good, Christine, you need to do. So he was giving me this mentoring that nobody saw. So it's also important to have mentors in your back pocket who can help you out, who you don't know. Everybody does not need to know who your mentor is. Okay, I'm checking my time here. Sorry, y'all. I get all excited and I keep going. So anyway, I can tell you stories about each one of these people. I'll tell you a story about this woman here, Mary Ann Fox, who was our chancellor. She was a chemist. She just passed away a few months ago. I was having some challenges with my lab. Dr. Warner knows about that. I didn't get the right lab space when I first started. You know, you've heard about inequities that sometimes happen to women and underrepresented minorities. And again, there's another term. Some people are dealing with that term, underrepresented minorities. I know that there are issues around that term, underrepresented and minorities. I know that, but I grew up using that term. I'm learning that there are other terms that you can use for underrepresented minorities. So just kind of put a pin in that. So Marianne Fox, I told her what was going on in my lab. What I didn't realize is that she actually, behind the scenes, and that's an advocate, behind the scenes, made stuff happen at my university so that my lab situation was straightened out. But I didn't find out till many years later that she had done that for me. Okay, she never told me. So there are lots of, and again, I got a story for each one of these people on this slide. So now I'm gonna ask you to write this down again. Execute a personalized mentoring ally plan. As you listen to me, and as we get into some details about the scholarship of mentoring, I want you to think about who you need to, because I'm gonna ask you at the end now. I'm gonna ask you to put it in the chat at the end. What are you gonna do differently as a result of this? So here are some things to consider when you're looking for a mentor, because people always, the question I always get is, how do you find a mentor? Well, shared experiences are important, not critical, but would help in at least one mentor. So a person who has gotten their PhD in chemical engineering or biology or whatever your field is, that would be one person, that's one criteria, right? Willingness to help during the developmental process and let go when the time is right. Somebody who's going to have their thumb on you forever is not good. So I would advise you to talk to people. If you're going to get somebody to be your mentor, try to talk to some of the people who have been mentored by that person and see, okay, when you were ready to kind of fly on your own, were they ready to let you go? Or did they kind of keep you under their thumbs? Because mentoring can become unhealthy. And I should mention now, before I go any further, that mentoring is not harassment and sexual harassment. If you have any situations where those start to occur, you need to tell somebody, you need to report it to the appropriate people and get help. Gotta say that there. The track record that the mentor has, and their mentoring ability, the communication style. I discovered something, so many people have heard me say this. I discovered something about 2 years ago, a term called introvert, because I am not an introvert. And so when I'm giving people advice as to how they should do things, I have to realize that maybe somebody's not as non-introvert as I am. And so when I'm talking to them, I have to take that into account. So you have to make sure you have the right compatibility. There are different types of mentors. A peer mentor, so if you are in graduate school and you have someone a couple of years ahead of you, a peer mentor would be somebody who's kind of in that same time frame. A career development mentor is a person who may provide short and long range career planning. And a personal mentor, somebody who will talk to you about personal elements of your life. My dean, who is Louis Martin Vega, who's amazing. He's Hispanic, originally from Puerto Rico. He's been my dean for 12 years or more. Well, my dean when I was the associate dean, I went to him and I said, I'd like to create a position. And he said, okay, let's do it. And he has been a mentor professionally, but also him and his wife have been personal mentors to me and my husband. Okay, so there's all kinds of different mentoring, and there's probably more than this. All right, so let's look at formal and informal mentoring. This is from a book by Zachary called Creating a Mentoring Culture, the Organization's Guide. And there are lots of people who have written lots of books on mentoring. So, if you have your favorite, then let that be your favorite. What they did was talk about finding a mentor, accountability, relationship, learning goals, and duration. And so formal and informal mentoring, these are two things. So this is for formal mentoring. Usually formal mentoring is facilitated selection. You're assigned to be a mentor, mentored by someone. There are eligibility requirements for you and the mentor. There's a learning fit and compatibility. The first contact might be, you have to do it by the beginning of the semester or something like that. There's accountability. The roles and responsibilities are very well defined. The commitment is required. There are mentoring agreements, and the program is managed. So I'm guessing that maybe the LS-AMP has some formal mentoring, right, where you are assigned a mentor. The relationship is usually a partnership. It's structured. It has commitment, milestones, things you need to do. And then there are ongoing communications. And then there are broad goals in terms of your learning outcomes. and the goals are regularly evaluated. There's some development goals, and then the duration may have a definite beginning and a definite end, right? So you go into a program, a postdoc program, you're assigned a mentor, which might be different than your advisor. You're assigned a mentor, and then you may renegotiate. But now, informal mentoring is different. Informal mentoring is self-initiated and involuntary. So you reach out and find this mentor. There's no eligibility requirements. It's just whoever it is that you feel you need to be mentored by. The chemistry of how you get along, you're going to find the right person, or the mentor is going to find the right person. And then the person gives advice. Now, mentoring is different than coaching. I'm not going to get into that today, but mentoring is different than coaching. And I have done coaching in the past, and I have been coached by people, paid people to coach me. The accountability, there's no formal agreement, there's no commitment. It could be for years, it could be for a short period of time. It's harder to evaluate how well it's going in terms of the accountability, and it's always self-managed. It's unstructured. There's lack of formal commitment. The communication is sporadic. And so I would say that Sandra McGuire, to talk about people in this program, and Isaiah Warner, they're informal mentors. I was never assigned to be a mentor of theirs. The goals may change over time. There may be goals that, you have a situation, you got to get it just in time feedback. That might happen as well. So those are the two big buckets in terms of formal and informal mentoring, according to the literature. Now, there are lots of different mechanisms for mentoring. The first is assigned mentors. So you may be assigned, I talked about that earlier. Cluster mentoring, I think you probably do some of that in the LS-PAC program, right? Where you come together as a group and you work together on things, and you're mentored by someone as a cluster. Naturally occurring mentors, which just kind of fall into a situation where somebody looks like they could be a good mentor. Mentee seeking, or protege seeking, where you're seeking out someone to mentor you. And mentor seeking, which is where I want to mentor somebody, and so I'm going to find that person. There's a really good consensus study report that the National Academies came out with. I believe it was last year, the Science of Effective Mentorship in STEM. I got to participate in one of the sessions and participate in the review process. So it's a very comprehensive book. And in STEM, the additional M is medicine. All right. So look that up if you need to. Allies are also important. Anyone has the capability to be an ally. An ally is someone that may recognize in some instance that they are not a member of what they are referring to as a marginalized group. They support, but they make a concerted effort to understand the struggle that they're going through. The ally might have more privilege and recognizes that they have privilege, and they are powerful voices alongside those who are marginalized. Again, don't get stuck on the terms. Everybody uses different terms to describe different communities. I'm going to skip this slide. So here are I did a survey of some people informally when I was speaking somewhere, and this is what people said in terms of mentoring advice. These were coming from mentees or proteges. So these people said, I wish my mentor would recognize that they act in a larger ecosystem. In other words, that everybody has their own goals, and that these mentors could help. So if you are a first-year grad student in chemistry, and a professor in chemical engineering, that perhaps you could check on that chemical engineering professor could help you in the ecosystem around the campus, right? A mentor would champion and foster goals and aspirations, give honest feedback, help me find ways to say, no, I can't do that, or no, this is not right, politely. Help me to figure out if something is an opportunity or not. Help and ask and advise honestly, give unasked advice. Sometimes they have to come in and give you advice. Tell me about any opportunities that may be useful for me. Would share opportunities again, would not tell me I'm too old to try something different. And they would celebrate their success. So I'm gonna kind of skip some of these. This is this mentoring diffusion, because I'm a chemical engineer, diagram that I came up with, this idea that mentoring when you're an undergrad happens, undergrads and grads kind of happens within that kind of community. And then early career as a faculty member, you do mentoring of others. Mid-career, you do mentoring of others, and then leadership, etc. I think at the core of mentoring a lot of times are the professional societies. For me, it's AICHE. For you, it might be ACS. It might be biomedical engineering society. It might be, I don't know all of your different disciplines, so I keep using the one that I know as an example. So again, hopefully you have found some ideas here about personalizing your mentoring plan. Who are you going to talk to about being a mentor? When are you going to do this? Where are you going to get this mentoring from? How are you going to go about doing it? Whose network are you going to use to do that? Right? So keep thinking about that. Cross-cultural mentoring, I'm gonna skip this here. Let me talk about my mentoring portfolio. Give a snapshot of my mentoring portfolio. So as you can see, there's several ways to think about mentoring, right? So a few years back, I was thinking about it this way, that I needed help with mentoring in a lot of areas. My self-identity, my personal life, service to the profession, resources that I needed, publishing, teaching, balancing the different facets of my life, mentoring, research, and other. Now, I did this a few years ago. It's probably different now in terms of the things that I'm doing, but you'll see that academic leadership and entrepreneurship, I didn't have much in there because I think I was just starting as a faculty member who was in the leadership role when I did this. But anyway, I invite you to think about what you need help with, and then there's probably stuff you might need help with that's not even on here. Okay, so you have to figure out what you need help with. Okay, back to some fun pictures. Can you figure out which one's me? The quiz. Yeah, it's the lady sitting on the couch. Dr. McGuire probably remembers this. We used to have our hair flipped up, put the little combs in. You remember that? Zakia, you might remember that too. So this is actually me. And I don't know if anybody recognizes this person. That's Howard Adams from the GEM program. So this was the first time I think I was a freshman in college. I was working at GE in the R&D center. And I was in a program, a cohort program. This is cohort mentoring. And Dr. Adams came to talk to us about grad school. I think that was the first time I learned about going to grad school for engineering, and that someone would pay for it. So this was us back in the day. This is me with my advisor. You see, we had a diverse group. This is my advisor here. He's no longer with us. And then I was a GEM fellow. I worked at GE. I worked at Procter & Gamble as a GEM fellow. And then I went to Georgia Tech. And so, you know, I look back on these things and I look back at the people who sewed into my life and sewed into me in a mentoring realm. And it really pushes me to do that to others. Early in my career, I did work in surface and interfacial science, and I was mentoring, right? Obviously, I was mentoring students. I was mentoring undergrads. I was mentoring postdocs when I was doing research. I don't have an active research lab at this point. Sorry, Dr. Warner. He told me, never give up your research lab. I'm sorry, I gave it up. So anyway, I'm full-time in administration now. But early on in my career, I did a lot of work in surface and interfacial science and dissolution and studies and published in different journals. Later on in my mid-career, I decided to do things like put together a mentoring incubator where students would come together and we would advise them, and they would go work in other people's labs, but they would still be mentored by myself and my team. And that was really fun because that was different. It allowed me to still be in the dean's office and still mentor communities of students without having to run a laboratory. And then we had grants from the National Science Foundation to do some things. We had an FREM where we were teaching people now how to do mentoring, and we were doing workshops for grad students to help them to be more effective mentors. So there's so many different things you can do in this realm that are actually a lot of fun. We developed a course for biomedical for early, like freshmen, sophomores, to learn about how to get into a research program as well. So these are all things that you can do if you're interested in this. And how do you incorporate that into things that you do in the academy? These are the responsibilities I had as Associate Dean of Faculty Advancement, and was responsible for reappointment, promotion, and tenure, post-tenure review. So now I'm getting to mentor faculty, right? So we had workshops to help them to get their NSF Career Award. We took them on trips to funding agencies. women faculty networking. So there were a lot of different things that I was able to do in my role. And as my dean told me, you can write another proposal, you can help another student in your lab, or you can build systems that will help people to do that. So I was able to do that, which was really exciting. We had another advanced grant to look at the informal and formal networks for women of color engineering faculty. And I worked with a very diverse group of women from different institutions to do that. And that was through the NSF Advanced program. And then, of course, there's celebrations of mentoring. They mentioned the PAISMEM Award, the AAAS Mentor Award. I'm really excited. You probably can't see it. It's up there, Dr. McGuire. I received my American Association for the Advancement of Science Mentoring Award the same day that, I'll get it, show to you. I think I can reach it. Oh, if I fall over, y'all don't laugh. Yeah, so this was my AAAS Mentor Award. And I got that award the same day that Dr. McGuire got her Lifetime Award, which was like so cool. We were both up there together. Unfortunately, if you remember, Dr. McGuire, it was 2 or 3 days after my mother had passed away. And so we made the trip up there so that I could get that award, because I know that's what my mother would have wanted. Okay, another cry moment. So the point is that, you know, sometimes amazing things happen to you in the middle of tragedy. So that was tragedy for me. But at the same time, I got to get this award. So that was really cool. So this is just, I just put these slides in as I heard Martha James talking. I said, well, I got to say something about NSF. So for me, I've had a lot of interaction with the National Science Foundation, whether these are all the different grant programs that I had grants in over the years, millions of dollars of funding. So I was not supported on NSF when I was an undergrad. I think maybe for grad school, possibly, but not in a program like this LS-PAC program. So you all have a great opportunity through this program. I'm really excited that my colleagues are working in this realm. And then the last few things I'll just tell you is, because I got to say something about my program at NSF. Okay, I'm putting on my NSF hat now. Okay, colleagues, so that I didn't have my hat on before. So I'm the program director of broadening participation in engineering, and we have funding. We're trying to understand the barriers associated with broadening participation, increasing access to engineering, recruiting and retaining tenure-track faculty. My portfolio is about $7 to $8 million. And the average size for a BPE research grant is about $350 to $400K for 36 months. I have people in my portfolio who are doing work having to do with K-12, undergrad, LGBTQ, women, faculty, sexual harassment in the academy, Latinas in STEM. It's a broad swath of people who are working in that realm. And I get to work with Martha James and some others in the NSF Includes program, the HBCU EIR program, the advanced program. So I get to now do this from a national, at a national level. So I'm really excited about that. Here are some of the projects that are funded in my portfolio. This slide was prepared for a conference I was doing to talk to Latinas in STEM, talk about Latinas in STEM. So hence the emphasis on Hispanic or Latinas. So I am going to finish up by talking about success in mentoring. This is a woman who was a part of a program I did when she was in middle school. She is now qualified to get her PhD in chemistry at NC State. And I'm so excited. I don't know, we look like kind of twins here, don't we? But I have more gray hair, okay? So, you know, I still get to do this. And this young lady I met when her father was doing power washing our house, and she was playing with a frog in our front yard. I was like, oh my goodness, you're like the daughter I never had in STEM. And so I've mentored her over the years, provided support for her and her family. And she just graduated from high school, and she's going to do STEM at UNC Charlotte. And I'm so excited because I met her, and this is a little doll, and it's a girl with pigtails holding a frog that I found. I promise you, I did not do that. But this is like the symbol of our relationship. And she just graduated, and this is when she was at another event. Anyway, so again, who are you? What are you going to do for your mentoring plan post-crisis? Whether it's a pandemic, it's a cancer scare. I'm a cancer survivor. Whether you just lost your loved one, I lost my mom. You know, there's a lot of things that happen. What are you going to do? How are you going to redo your mentoring plan after a crisis? And in this case, the crisis was or is a pandemic. So with that, I'll end. Mentors everywhere, weaving informal and formal mentoring into a robust STEM mentoring quilt. I hope that you have learned from me that mentoring can change over time. You can do mentoring, you can be mentored, you can stop mentoring for a while and just do you, and you can be celebrated for the mentoring that you do. So I'm going to stop there. I know there's a lot of comments in the chat, and I will take questions. Robert, I don't know how much time we have. I did not have a timer on here, so I am just going to take it. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to look in the chat, and then you tell me what I need to do.
Sure. Thank you so much, Dr. Grant. If we were in person, I think there would be a raucous round of applause. So thank you so much. So I think what we're going to do right now is, if anyone has any questions for Dr. Grant, you can put those in the chat.
So I'm gonna read a couple things. So somebody said the pandemic has changed the dynamic of my mentoring. My mentees are closer to me than they were before the pandemic. And so somebody else said that it's difficult to find the balance between the space for the pandemic, giving people their space. The nature of progress monitoring and definable benchmarks have changed. Mentoring with my students has become more personal, even more one-on-one time. So actually, some of you may be benefiting more pandemic. No, I'm just kidding. That was not a joke. I'm sorry, that was not funny. And that did not represent the views of the National Science Foundation. I think that there were things that we got out of the pandemic that were really good, really kind of focusing on home. And then there were some things that were really challenging. And of course, the worst part was losing people. Okay, so make sure you don't get it twisted. I'm not celebrating the pandemic. Okay, all right, so questions. I love it. Let's see. Extrovert, introvert, yes. I didn't even know what that was. No questions. Well, the question I always get is, how do I find a mentor? That's the question people always ask me. And you just start from scratch. You go to a conference or you're on a Zoom call, you send somebody a private chat, you say, can I talk to you later? You don't say, can you be my mentor? Because people are going to be like, no, I don't have that kind of time. But just start talking, because mentoring is about relationships. It's about trust. It's about developing, authenticity, authentic connections between people. And have I ever had to get rid of a mentor? I've had to transition from a mentor-mentee role in the faculty realm. I had faculty members who were my mentors, who seemed to kind of keep wanting me in that secondary position. So I actually had to go somewhere else. So I actually went to University of Minnesota. I went to Caltech with David Terrell and Matt Terrell, who are white males, took me under their wing and tried to help me to reframe my research in a different area, to move away from the person that I was doing research with. Me and that colleague are still colleagues. So we moved from mentor to mentee to protege to colleagues. So I had to step away for a minute. I've been at NC State for 31 years. Some people go to another institution. I stepped away for a minute so that I could kind of regroup. Somebody said, how did I get over stereotype threat? I don't really know how to answer that question. I know that I'm constantly evaluating how people are responding to me, right? Like, and I don't want to be paranoid. You have to pick your battles. I used to think, oh, are they doing that because I'm a woman, or because I'm a minority, or because I'm a Black woman? What? And then you can just go crazy. People used to ask me, are you getting treated differently in your college because you're a Black woman? And I would say, well, I don't really know the answer to that question, but I will tell you this. I'm the only Black woman in the college. So if you want to make that, if you want to draw those inferences, that's up to you. So I think you can drive yourself crazy on some elements of that. And I will tell you, Dr. McGuire, I have not really focused a lot on stereotype threat. So that's why I'm having a hard time answering this question. You're going to make me think. See, that's what a mentor does. He or she makes you think. So I'm going to think more about that. Somebody asked the question, how do you navigate a relationship with a mentor who has different goals for you than the goals you hold for yourself? So depends on who that mentor is. If that mentor is your advisor, now all of you have PhD advisors or research advisors, that person has a mentoring role, but that may not be your mentor. So your mentor, person that you really go to, the go-to person may not be that advisor. If you're talking about different goals for you and the person's your advisor, you got to just toe the line. You got to do what you got to do to get your PhD. You got to do what you got to do to get your postdoc done. You got to get those papers done. There's some deliverables in there. There's almost like an unwritten contract. You have to get those things done. And those goals, if that person thinks that you should be an academic and you want to go into industry, I don't talk a lot about industry or national labs because that's not I don't have a lot of experience with that, but I acknowledge that those exist. If you want to go into a national lab to work, don't come talk to me because I don't know enough about it. I'll tell you who to talk to. But if I'm continuing to push for you to become a professor and you want to go to a national lab, you need to just listen to me and consider the source and then find other ways to get the information you need. Now, if this is a relationship with a mentor who has different goals and they have no authority over you, they're not your advisor, then you can politely say thank you very much and start to enlarge your network with other people who have different goals for you. Because at the end of the day, you're the one who's got to go to work every day. So, okay, let me go to the next one. What practical steps did you implement to continue being productive while trying to overcome some of the larger challenges, losing a loved one, pandemic? Well, I imply this when I'm talking, but I don't push it. I am a woman of faith. And so therefore my faith community, my pastor, my, the deacons, the sisters for when we have women's retreats. And that's what got me through my first few years as an academic, was knowing that at the end of the fall semester, we were going to go on a 3-day women's retreat with just a bunch of African-American women of faith. For me, that's me. I'm not saying it should be you. That's what I did. I think it's really important to stay true to your core values, I call them your faith, family, and fundamentals, whatever your core values are, whether it's a faith practice, whether it's yoga, whether it's whatever it is. If you're an athlete and you're going to go riding every day, I hurt my knee, but I went for a little walk. I know it's like a baby walk to some of y'all. I was out for like 10 minutes, but at least I was out. So whatever it is that you got to do, and make sure. Oh, the other thing is, if you have any mental issues, if you feel like you're losing your mind, please go get help. I did that in grad school. I've done that as a faculty member. I've gone to a counselor. When I had transitions from grad school to being a faculty member, from being a faculty member to being a mom, from being a mom to being a whatever, I have had a counselor, woman. And she might have been an African-American woman or a white woman. Usually I have women. That's what I feel comfortable with. And go to counseling. It's covered. If you're a grad student, it's probably covered somewhere in the system. Go get counseling. It doesn't have to be for life. I did it because I needed to get through those. I couldn't figure it out, and my girlfriends weren't enough to help me figure it out. Okay, let's see. Who are typically the PIs for proposals? Are they faculty members with active STEM research programs, or are they administrators? That's a really good question. When I look at my portfolio, I think that there are. Okay, I'm putting on my NSF hat, y'all. When I look at my portfolio, I think of two types of people. One are the people who do broadening participation, engineering, education, research. Those would be the administrators or the social science researchers that you're talking about. There's those people, and then there's people like me who were at the time bench scale researchers doing experimental work, who wanted to somehow put some scholarship on the experience that they were having, and went to the National Science Foundation and got funding. So I think that those are the two groups in general. The key thing, though, for whatever program you're interested in, is to write a 1 to 2 pager, send it to the program officer, and then set up a time to talk to them. That's the key thing to do. Who are typically okay? I think that was sent to everyone. I think I got them all. Yeah, I think I got them all. I always go so fast because I'm not sure when the moderator is going to say, "Okay, Christine, your time is up." I'm really excited for this. I came down to, okay, Dr. Warren, I'm going to tell the story. I came down to do a talk. I think it was I think I went to Exxon plant or something. And then I did a talk at LSU in chemistry maybe or something. And it was 26 years ago. And Dr. Warren and his wife were my host. And he and I will never forget it because I just found out that I was pregnant with my son. He's now 25, going on 26. And I was at a dinner with him and his wife, and I wasn't feeling too well. And the only person I could tell, because it was so early in my pregnancy, was his wife. So I said, I just found out I'm pregnant. I'm not feeling too well. And so she like helped me to navigate, okay, eat this or don't eat this. And it was so way cool. And then later on, of course, I think she probably told him. So LSU and all you folks that are south of me, you know, I'm really excited to be a part of this. And my colleagues from NSF, if you're still on, I hope you know that I took my hat off and put it back on at the right times. Okay, I've got one more, I think. How do you navigate? Okay, wait a second. There might be one more here. How do you balance the responsibilities as a faculty member with additional mentoring programs you created? What did that look like for you? So when I first started as a faculty member, is this the last one, Robert? I'll stop after this.
Okay. Yes, thank you.
So he's like, yeah, you better stop. Anyway.
No. Take your time.
I'm just kidding. I'm feeling kind of excited. I love doing this. When I first started as a faculty member, I wanted to take every minority student and just take them in my room, in my office, and talk to them about going to grad school. You were a freshman, I'm gonna talk to you about going to grad school. I'm gonna spend all this time. And the guy who was my mentor, who I would see on a regular basis, he said, Christine, you can't do that because your colleagues aren't doing that, and you can't do that. You got to get tenure before you can start doing those kinds of things. So there were people who said, you're doing too much with this group of students in your laboratory, because if you do that and you don't produce, you're not going to get tenure. And if you don't get tenure, you're going to be gone and you're going to help no one. So I had to have people speaking in my ear to help me to manage that. And then when I became an associate dean and I didn't have an active research program, that's when I developed those other programs. And if you can get funding for some of those programs, that gives you some credibility, right? Because you have funding for a program, even if it's little seed funding from around campus or from a company or something to do something. And then there's a lot of things I do just because I love doing them. And so it was a challenge, but somebody had to mentor me to help me to figure out at an NC State. Now, if you are at a primarily teaching institution where mentoring and working with students is big and you're teaching three classes a semester, whatever your paradigm is and the expectation is going to be different. So you need to understand what the expectation is where you are. Yeah. Okay, Robert, I'm done. Can I drop the mic? I don't have a mic to drop.